Well, I don't think we're going to necessarily ask for a declaration of war. I think we're just going to kill people that are bringing drugs into our country.
It was still early morning in a quiet American suburb when federal teams moved into position, using the silence before sunrise to mask one of the largest coordinated operations of the year. Agents were targeting a hidden network linked to the Sinaloa and CJNG cartels, a network that had quietly expanded across U.S. communities with the structure of a multinational group. What followed was a sudden strike that ended with 44 arrests, including individuals connected to foreign extremist circles, and it forced officials to admit that the threat inside the country was deeper than anyone expected. As the first reports came in, investigators began tracing the clues that had led them to this operation, and those clues revealed a far more complex picture waiting behind closed doors. Subscribe to Military Power to follow the next investigation from the moment those early morning teams step into position, because every new clue brings us closer to understanding the threats hidden behind America's quiet streets. Federal intelligence units began to notice unusual activity across several neighborhoods in Houston and in surrounding states, and these early observations formed the first layer of concern for investigators. The irregular patterns did not appear dramatic at first sight, yet they created a picture that did not match the daily rhythm of a typical residential area. Analysts started to compare surveillance logs from different districts, and the similarities raised additional questions because the movements repeated in several unrelated locations. This process pushed federal teams to take a deeper look into what seemed at first like minor abnormalities in quiet communities. The most striking element of the early intelligence work involved encrypted phones detected in places where they should not have been active. These devices produced short bursts of activity during late hours, and they communicated through channels designed to hide the sender and the receiver. Investigators connected multiple incidents that occurred between midnight and dawn, and every data point strengthened the belief that these devices were part of a controlled system instead of isolated personal use. Analysts flagged the pattern because encrypted communication traffic usually appears close to border operations or financial hubs, not in suburban streets of South Houston. Investigators also monitored the placement of small surveillance cameras that appeared on rooftops, at side gates, and near traffic entrances. While cameras are common in many American homes, these specific installations pointed toward a different purpose. Each device covered a blind spot that most homeowners never consider, and the angles matched layouts used in security compounds operated by criminal groups in Mexico. The cameras stayed active through the night, and they transmitted to devices that were never registered within the United States. This detail suggested a structure designed for monitoring movements on the ground, and intelligence officers began to map these angles to see whether they formed a coordinated grid. Nighttime vehicle movement added another layer to the picture. Several cars without registration plates appeared in the same areas where encrypted phones and hidden routers were detected. These vehicles arrived shortly before midnight and left before sunrise, following routes that did not match the flow of regular traffic. The timing indicated that the drivers wished to avoid public exposure, and their consistency over several weeks turned the movement pattern into a major point of interest. When analysts compared these routes with historical data on cartel logistics, they found a match with distribution paths used by networks operating deep inside Mexico. The final confirmation came when intelligence officers studied the blueprint of a specific house in South Houston. The building did not follow common residential standards, and several parts of the structure showed reinforcement far beyond what a family would require. Investigators identified thickened interior walls, a foundation with unusual load capacity, and a basement layout that did not match any approved design. These features strongly resembled fortified command posts used by the Sinaloa and CJNG groups in Mexico, and the connection alerted federal agencies that the threat inside the neighborhood was not only real, but also organized with professional discipline. This discovery pushed the investigation into its next phase as analysts prepared to understand how this structure fit into the larger network that had quietly taken shape across the region. Federal surveillance teams registered a decisive change in activity shortly before the operation began. And this change marked the first clear indication that the network had moved into a defensive posture. Drone footage captured lookout positions, shifting across several target locations, and the movements followed a pattern that suggested preparation rather than routine observation. The timing of these adjustments raised immediate concern among analysts because the positions were reinforced at points designed to monitor potential entry routes. When investigators reviewed the footage frame by frame, they confirmed that each lookout had moved with deliberate caution, which meant that the individuals on the ground were aware of an approaching threat. Another signal that strengthened federal suspicion came from a heavily modified car that began circulating around the main target area. The vehicle displayed signs of improvised armor, and its movement suggested that it was acting as a mobile relay for communication. Analysts noted that the car did not follow a fixed route. Instead, it traveled in a slow and calculated pattern that allowed it to maintain proximity to multiple lookout positions. This behavior matched intelligence models associated with organized criminal groups that use mobile platforms to reduce the risk of interception. Federal command centers assessed the situation and concluded that the group behind these signals was preparing for a coordinated defensive action. Intelligence officers compared the timing of the lookout shifts, the movement of the armored vehicle, and the pattern of encrypted communication detected earlier in the night. The combination of these elements led analysts to believe that the network intended to delay or resist an incoming operation. This assessment prompted federal teams to accelerate their timeline, because the longer they waited, the stronger the defensive structure could become. At exactly 4:03 a.m., the order to launch simultaneous raids across all designated targets was issued, and this marked the transition from surveillance to active enforcement. The timing of the command was not accidental. Federal teams had studied the network's internal routine for weeks and learned that this moment often coincided with a change in the cartel's overnight rotation. This shift in personnel created a brief window where readiness levels dropped and coordination weakened. By acting during this interval, federal agencies aimed to limit the ability of the group to organize a counter-response. The decision to strike at this precise moment reflected the depth of preparation that went into the operation and demonstrated how intelligence findings shaped the tactical approach. This moment marked the true beginning of the enforcement phase, and it defined the pace of what followed as agents prepared to move from observation to direct contact at each target site. Federal teams moved into the assault phase immediately after the synchronized order was issued, and each unit advanced toward its designated target with a level of preparation shaped by weeks of intelligence work. The entry teams from FBI, SWAT, and DEA breaching units reached their positions at almost the same moment, and this coordination allowed them to control the first seconds of the operation. Their approach followed a method used in high-risk enforcement actions, where speed and accuracy reduced the chance of resistance forming inside the structures. The teams advanced along predetermined paths, and their movement created the conditions for a controlled breach across multiple locations. The first sign of armed resistance appeared at one of the primary sites when a burst of gunfire cut through the early morning silence. The rounds came from a modified AR-15 that had been fitted for stability and short-range accuracy. The controlled bursts indicated that the individual behind the weapon had received training, and this detail confirmed earlier intelligence assessments that the network was preparing to defend the location. The initial shots forced entry teams to adjust their positioning while maintaining pressure on the defensive line. This quick shift allowed them to continue the operation without losing momentum. Inside the structure, the tactical layout revealed that the occupants had prepared several defensive elements. Investigators later documented a barricade built from sandbags that had been placed beside the stairwell, which provided cover for individuals attempting to slow the federal advance. The barrier was positioned to create a narrow approach line, and this positioning forced SWAT operators to clear the entry point with additional caution. At the same time, other individuals inside the building attempted to relocate sensitive items, and federal teams observed movements toward a basement area that had been reinforced during earlier construction. The attempt to move documents and electronic devices toward this lower level indicated that the group intended to preserve operational material even during direct confrontation. Another significant discovery came from a review of video feeds found later in the operation. A helmet camera worn by one of the defenders had streamed the early seconds of the confrontation to contacts outside the United States. The transmission path suggested that the footage was sent to receivers positioned in Mexico, and this detail supported the assessment that the network operated as part of a larger command structure. The use of live video also provided insight into how the group intended to monitor federal movements and coordinate responses across different safe houses. Federal teams responded with an organized countermeasure. SWAT operators gained control of the front section of the building and secured the living room, which served as the first major interior checkpoint. Their control of this area created a stable position from which they could move toward the inner rooms. DEA breaching personnel then targeted a reinforced interior wall that blocked access to the rear section of the structure. The wall had been designed to delay intruders, but breachers used specialized tools to penetrate it and open a new route for the advancing teams. The entry created by this action allowed additional units to move inside the building. Homeland Security teams supported the advance using night vision equipment that allowed them to track movement in low-light conditions. This capability proved essential because the defenders attempted to use the building's interior shadows to conceal their positions. With enhanced visibility, federal operators moved through the remaining sections while maintaining control of each corner and hallway. At the same time, ATF personnel blocked potential escape routes outside the structure by positioning an armored rescue vehicle at the back entrance. The placement of this vehicle prevented the possibility of a retreat from the basement or the lower-level rooms. The coordinated actions of all federal teams brought the confrontation to an end in less than 90 seconds, which demonstrated the advantage created by preparation and timing. The defenders surrendered once their positions were isolated, and no federal personnel were injured during the exchange. The rapid conclusion of the encounter allowed investigators to move into the next phase of the operation, where the priority shifted from immediate safety to identifying the full scope of activity inside the fortified location. The inspection that followed the rapid end of the confrontation revealed details inside the Houston property that shifted the operation from a simple enforcement action to a significant national security concern. Technical teams entered the structure after the site was declared safe, and their evaluation showed that the building had been engineered with features that did not belong in an ordinary residential environment. The house, from its foundation to its reinforced interior, displayed characteristics normally associated with fortified positions used by organized groups operating in conflict zones. This discovery marked the moment when investigators recognized that they were dealing with a deliberate attempt to embed a defensive stronghold within a suburban community. The first major indication came from the front entrance, which held a steel door weighing approximately 410 pounds. The door had been secured with internal welding and anchoring points that were capable of resisting forced entry for an extended period. The frame surrounding the door had been reinforced through multiple layers of steel plating, and this construction method aligned with techniques used in military-style safe rooms. The weight and structure of the door indicated that it had been installed with the intention of slowing federal teams should they attempt to breach the location. This level of preparation suggested that the occupants anticipated a confrontation and wanted to control the timeline in the early minutes of an enforcement action. Further inspection of the interior walls showed that the reinforcement continued throughout the structure. Several rooms contained support beams that did not match residential design plans, and the layers of metal embedded within the walls would have required significant time and resources to assemble. The reinforced sections created compartments that could resist mechanical force, and investigators determined that these modifications were designed to protect equipment stored within the property. The presence of these reinforced spaces confirmed that the building functioned as a controlled environment rather than a simple living space. A more alarming element of the layout existed beneath the main floor. The property contained a concealed basement that had been designed as a bunker-style room. complete with multiple screens showing live video feeds from cameras positioned around the neighborhood. The screens formed an 8-angle monitoring system that allowed the occupants to track movement outside the home in real time. Technical teams observed that the basement had an independent power supply, and the equipment was capable of operating even if the main electrical lines were disabled. This redundancy demonstrated a level of planning consistent with organized groups that prepare for long-duration standoffs. Communication systems inside the structure added another layer to the assessment. Investigators located several encrypted radio devices connected to concealed nodes placed within ceiling panels. These nodes linked the property to external communication routes, and the system allowed the occupants to maintain contact even if parts of the building were compromised. The placement of these devices showed a deliberate attempt to hide the communication chain, and analysts later confirmed that the structure had been connected to activity observed earlier in the night. This connection supported the theory that the network used the house as a command point for regional coordination. Surveillance equipment found throughout the property reinforced the overall conclusion about the building's purpose. Cameras were positioned along the outer perimeter, and each device covered an angle designed to eliminate blind spots. Motion sensors were even installed inside ventilation shafts, which allowed the occupants to detect movement approaching the property through unconventional paths. The presence of these sensors suggested a level of technical expertise that exceeded what is typically seen in criminal safe houses, and the configuration matched patterns observed in fortified structures used by cartel groups in northern Mexico. The combined findings confirmed that the Houston property was not a drug storage site. It was a tactical fortress embedded within a residential community, functioning as a hidden control point for a larger network. Intelligence officers viewed this discovery as evidence that the group responsible for the structure had attempted to expand operational models used in Mexico into the interior of the United States. This shift represented a serious escalation because it indicated a willingness to establish hardened positions inside American neighborhoods. The assessment from federal analysts concluded that the presence of such a structure posed a direct threat to local residents and revealed the scale of the cartel's ambition within the country. The findings from this phase of the operation prepared investigators for the broader implications that would become clear as they began analyzing the remaining sites connected to the network. The search that followed the securement of the property allowed federal investigators to understand the full scale of activity inside the Houston structure. Once each room had been cleared and all individuals had been detained, evidence teams began a systematic review of the interior. Their first task was to identify substances, weapons, and documents that could explain how the location functioned, and this process revealed a collection of items that exceeded what is typically found in narcotics safe houses. The volume and organization of the material indicated that the property served as an operational center rather than a temporary storage point. The most significant discovery came from the large quantity of narcotics located across several compartments in the building. Investigators recovered approximately 780 pounds of substances packaged in a manner consistent with regional distribution networks. The arrangement of the material suggested that the property played a role in coordinating shipments rather than simply holding them. The weight of the narcotics indicated the scale of movement that the group was capable of handling in a short period of time, and the packaging style matched patterns seen in multi-state distribution routes. Weapons found inside the property added further insight into the intended purpose of the structure. Teams documented 14 firearms placed in multiple rooms, and several of these weapons were fitted with suppressors. The placement of the weapons indicated that they were positioned for quick access rather than long-term storage. The presence of suppression equipment showed that the operators expected the possibility of close-range conflict, and the number of firearms reflected a level of preparation that paralleled the reinforced structure of the building. Each weapon was found with magazines close by, and this detail suggested an emphasis on readiness inside the property. Electronic devices located during the search revealed another layer of operational planning. Investigators recovered multiple encrypted tablets that contained data storage features, associated with communication and financial tracking. The tablets were found in areas that appeared to function as workstations, and analysts noted that several devices were powered on when the operation began. This detail suggested that the occupants had been actively coordinating tasks shortly before federal teams entered the building. Technical specialists later confirmed that the devices were linked to communication routes identified earlier in the night, which established a direct connection between the property and other nodes in the network. Financial evidence discovered inside the structure supported the assessment that the building served as a command hub for broader activity. A total of approximately $2,300,000 was located behind false wall panels. The cash was sorted into bundles that reflected proceeds from multiple transactions, and the storage method indicated an effort to conceal revenue in a secure environment. The amount of recovered currency demonstrated the scale of income generated through the network and showed that funds were being organized at this site before being dispersed to additional locations. The combination of narcotics, weapons, electronic devices, financial evidence, and operational records showed that the Houston property was functioning as a command site inside the United States. The structured layout of the evidence indicated that the group used the building to coordinate activity across multiple states, and this finding confirmed earlier intelligence assessments about the depth of cartel operations within American communities. The discoveries inside the property prepared investigators for the broader analysis that would follow as federal agencies examined the implications of a fortified command hub operating on domestic soil. The outcome of the operation provided federal agencies with a clear understanding of how deeply the Sinaloa and CJNG alliance had expanded inside the United States. The arrest of 44 individuals weakened the immediate structure that supported the network, yet the findings inside the Houston property revealed that the organization had already developed an internal framework that extended beyond a single location. The volume of evidence collected from the scene confirmed that the network followed an operational model similar to large transnational groups, and authorities recognized that the scale of its activity required sustained national attention. This assessment shifted the focus from a single enforcement action to the broader implications for internal security. The ledgers, encrypted devices, and financial documents found across the property demonstrated that the network had created its own management system. The records showed detailed information on distribution routes and revenue movement, and the communication data highlighted the coordination of multiple locations across state lines. The presence of these materials inside a fortified structure illustrated the intention to establish a long-term base of operations. Analysts concluded that the group had attempted to embed a self-sufficient chain of command within American communities, and this structure posed a risk that extended far beyond narcotics distribution. The political impact of the operation is also likely to be significant. The discovery of a fortified command hub inside an American neighborhood will raise questions about border policy, federal authority, and the long-term strategy for combating cartel influence within the country. Public debate may intensify as lawmakers and communities react to the notion that organized groups have attempted to build structured positions beyond the border region. These discussions will shape future policy frameworks and may influence resource allocation for homeland security operations. The broader message of the operation extends beyond the tactical success achieved during the raids. The findings serve as a reminder that threats can evolve in form and location, and the United States will need to adapt quickly to detect and respond to structures that do not follow traditional patterns. For viewers following developments in national security, the case demonstrates how enforcement actions reveal deeper strategic challenges. For continued updates and analysis on these shifting threats, audiences are encouraged to share their perspectives and stay connected for future reports. This operation shows how quickly new threats can take shape inside the United States and why they must be addressed without delay. Subscribe to Military Power to stay updated on every critical development ahead.